When you're using a SIBO breath test to assess for methane dominant SIBO and it comes back with methane production, you're going to see one of three patterns quite commonly. So the first one is just kind of classic methane dominant SIBO. So there's low baseline methane, that's the orange one here. This is the x-axis right here, and at about 40 minutes, there's a steep increase in methane. Different labs use different cutoffs. Some use 12 parts per million or more increase. I use 10 parts per million or more. I'm a little bit more conservative because I do want to treat bacterial overgrowth if it is present. That's the first kind of category you might see, the first result. The second result right here, so I posted this from a scientific article, a journal. Elevated methane levels in small intestinal bacterial overgrowth suggest delayed small bowel and colonic transit. So you can find that right there. You can click on it, it'll take you to the journal. So here we have high baseline methane, and a commenter on the blog left a great comment. P1 said, "The graph that you show for methane dominant SIBO, that one I just showed you, has an enormous level of baseline." Absolutely. It was up around 120. That's extremely high. It looks like this is high colonic methane, so he's talking about the large bowel methane production there, rather than a methane SIBO. At minimum, the person did not follow the test prep diet. Awesome point. Very crucial that you adhere to the prep diet so you get a good clean read. So there was a lot of fermentation happening in the colon. That made the baseline methane very high. This might still be a big problem. Good point again, but it is not SIBO methane. So awesome comment. I had to think about that and do quite a bit of research. So here we go back to the graph he was talking about, or they were talking about. As long as the test prep diet was followed, and if the patient was significantly constipated, then they needed to follow the test prep diet longer. There is still a pretty significant rise in methane over baseline. So it goes from just below 120 up to about 160. And then it kind of stays along the same one. And then again, there's a pretty significant rise before the 90-minute mark. So again, as long as the test prep diet was followed for the proper amount of time, I would still consider this methane dominant SIBO, and I would still treat the small bowel. That brings me to a third methane positive result that you might find in a SIBO breath test. And that is when you start with a high baseline methane and it just kind of stays. So for example, if it was 120, it just stays at 120, might go up just a little bit, maybe goes down a little bit to the 90-minute mark and beyond. And what we're seeing there isn't technically methane dominant SIBO, as far as we know. But we're thinking more it's large bowel methane production. So that's why it's so important to be assessing the large bowel at the same time as we're assessing the small bowel. And so I will use a DNA-based stool test, has to be DNA-based. Culture-based stool tests are just outdated technology and they aren't reliable. That will give me the complete microbiome of the large bowel as best as we can provide it. No test is perfect. And so we used to use uBiome. They have gone out of business. So companies like Thrive have really stepped up to fill in that niche. Here in Australia, you can use Microba, and that will give you the bacterial composition of the large bowel. So in a SIBO breath test, if you had high baseline methane, and it didn't have a significant spike, or even if it did have a significant spike like here, I would be thinking that the large bowel is involved as well. And so I have results from a patient that did have methane dominant SIBO, started with high baseline methane, and it did have that significant increase in methane. And we have an overgrowth of Methanobrevibacter, the genus, and this genus produces methane. So this is in the large bowel, and it is representing 1.18% of the bacterial makeup of this patient's large bowel. So Methanobrevibacter, that genus, it's most likely Methanobrevibacter smithii. That's the most commonly found methane-producing microbe in SIBO and also in the large bowel in humans. And 1.18, that is orders of magnitude higher than we want it. If this patient did have methane dominant SIBO, which they did, a result similar to this one with a significant increase, we want to be treating the small bowel, and that's our top priority. Once we've cleared that methane in the small bowel and reduced it, then we can move on to the large bowel. The same treatment will target both the small and the large bowel. And then once we've cleared it, we can really hone in on the large bowel as well. And treating high methane, whether it's the small bowel or the large bowel, will help with constipation, gut transit time, and all of the other symptoms associated with methane dominant SIBO.